Hi, my name's Connor and I just finished reading 1984, so I'm going to be going for a brief review with you guys. I want to be able to do it without giving out a bunch of spoilers, so here we go. So 1984 is written by George Orwell. It was written in 1949, and the time period is obviously 1984 that he's writing about. So he's writing about 35 years into the future. There's a ton of reasons why I believe he wrote this book, but we'll go into that shortly. What I want to start with is basically a plot summary. So our book, our main character is a guy called Winston Smith. Now we arrive in Winston's life. He's 39 years old and he lives in a dystopian London. So it's not London as we know it, and it doesn't even belong to the UK anymore. Something called Airstrip 1. Now Airstrip 1 is what I think is the new Britain, and it belongs to a superstate called Oceania, which is difficult to say. Now, Oceania is one of 3 superstates left in this dystopian world. It's Oceania. You also have East Asia and you have Eurasia, and they're all constantly at war with each other. In this dystopian future, Winston is working for something called the Party, which is the overall regime that runs Oceania. It later comes to find out that East Asia and Eurasia are run by something kind of similar. Now, the party's name and their political ideals is called INGSOC, which is ING and then SOC, and it stands for English Socialism. Now, the way that they run things, the party, it's an idea of complete surveillance. Everywhere you go to, including your home, including a restaurant or a bar, out on the street, even out in nature, but especially while you're at work in places where you can interact with people, there are things called telescreens that will record every last detail, including your facial expressions from a 360 angle, and also microphones in as many places as you can imagine. The goal of this is that they can see exactly what you're doing, exactly what you're thinking, and just who you are as a person. At all times, meaning there is no privacy in this world. Their goal is to figure out, well, are you believing what they're putting out and the propaganda that they're putting out, but also really just to keep you in check and to make sure that they control as much as possible. Now, INGSOC uses classic propaganda techniques to keep control of its people. They insist on there being no sex for recreation. They insist on the famine being widespread, even though as a country they're constantly producing huge amounts and overproducing and very successfully creating new wealth and raising the standard of living. None of that is seen. The level of surveillance is obviously difficult for people to overcome because they can't voice any issues or voice any concerns. And one thing they'll do as well is they create a kind of atmosphere where anybody will tell on you and go to the authorities if they believe that you don't believe in what the party's pushing out. Now, I'm sure you can imagine the terror if your children, your family, your friends were, the prime suspects for snitching on you and putting your name badly to the party. It would be a very scary world to live in. They've even created their own language called Newspeak. The goal of Newspeak is to condense the English language down and ensure that there's less ways for you to explain yourself and less ways for you to express yourself, and overall just less ways for you to think. It has words like unalive somebody, which means somebody completely disappears and goes off the radar and is erased from history, all their records and documents. Double plus good means incredibly good. Double plus bad means incredibly bad, and so on and so forth. Just another way they can control the narrative. So the book follows Winston. Winston has a massive problem living in this world. His big problem is that he still remembers a time before the revolution and before the party took hold, a time that according to the party doesn't exist. They alter all the information previously and all the information that counteracts anything that they say is going on currently. So his big issue is that he now believes that there is a different way of thinking, and he remembers that this party is not who they say they are, but he has no way of expressing it. Or so we think. What happens is that Winston believes that there's 1 or 2 people from interactions he's had that maybe think the same way as him. And he thinks that potentially there is something called the Brotherhood that is led by someone called Goldstein, who is what the party hates and has different ideals. And really where this book kicks off and the story takes hold is he reaches out to these people in the hope and the prayer that they are also feeling the same way as him and finding some kind of way to overthrow this party. So that's my summary of the book without giving anything away. What I wanted to talk about was how this book made me feel. Now, this book is a classic, and I'm amazed I haven't read it before this. I know a lot of people had to read it during school. My initial, from the first act, is more about world building from George Orwell. He's about explaining what's going on in the world and how it's run. My initial emotions were really of bleakness, a little bit of anger, and honestly fear as well. The idea of, because I was putting myself in his role, which obviously books do for you, and what I was thinking is life would be so bleak. There would be no way to communicate with someone. There was almost no laughing, no enjoyment. I wasn't even allowed to show any of the emotions that I had, not only at work, which, you know, in some ways that happens, but at home, out at a bar, on a walk, talking with my family, and the constant fear that everyone around you is out to get you. Now, not only that, I could imagine being Winston and understanding that this was, you know, a totalitarian regime and something that's not good. But also feeling like the only person who felt that way. I can see how it would make you feel absolutely insane. And that's how the first act made me feel. The second act actually gave me some hope. Winston finds a couple of different ways to rebel and go back to a more of a normal lifestyle and a more of an expressive and a lifestyle that we would probably recognize today, which filled me with hope and happiness and an idea that, okay, well, as long as they can't control what you're thinking and your human spirit and free will, then there's hope, right? And then as we move into the third act, again without giving anything away, the first thing I felt from the third act was I felt educated. I think it's really clear that Orwell had a goal, and his goal is to educate, to teach, and I really didn't know a huge amount about politics, and now I feel like I've dipped my toe into a huge world that maybe I haven't really taken an interest in before, which actually runs everything. So it would be important to. But I felt very educated. I feel like I learned a lot about socialism, about communist values. But most importantly, I feel like this book will definitely have changed my life a little bit. And I'll tell you how. They put a huge emphasis on the understanding that reality is actually only in people's heads. If I were to tell you that I could float, and I believed that I was floating, and in some way I could convince you that you saw me floating and you would remember it that way, then I floated. And that's, you know, something that happens in the book is something along those lines. And the idea behind it is that, well, if you control the present, then you control the past. Past isn't actually something that's here and now, something that we can touch and grab. It's recorded via memory and via writing. So one thing the party is going to do is, if they can control your memory of the event, and if they can also control what's written down about it, do they not control the past? Did I not float? Which I thought was an amazing concept. And it kind of made me realize and double down on the idea that if I can control what's going on in my brain, then I control my own reality, and I can make it whatever I want it to be, obviously within reason, but I can make it happy. I can control the lens and perspective with which I filter the entire world around me, which is a huge gift. But what it also made me realize was that if I allow somebody else to control what goes into my head, the information, the way I perceive things, then they control my life. And that could be bad, because most people are greedy in the sense that they will use that to benefit themselves. And I started to think, well, you know, we see this every day in the news. We see it even in social media, and what gets pumped out all the time is somebody trying to control the narrative. And really, we think, oh, they're just controlling the narrative, but really that would mean controlling reality for that person or for that those people affected, which is a scary thought, which I feel like opened my eyes to. And the final thing that I feel like I learned from this is not to take for granted the freedoms that I have. Like, we all hear stories of places such as North Korea, for example, who are under totalitarian rule, where it is very much propaganda based in a very different way to the United States or the UK, for example, and not to take that for granted. Don't take for granted that you can read what you want to, you can have what opinions you like, and, you know, to pretty much any degree, you can go and have free speech as well, which is another great thing to realize I was taking for granted. Finally, I want to move into my recommendation. I would recommend anybody to read this book. I think that it's very important for people to read, and I think it gives a perspective on government and how reality can be controlled as a whole. I think you'll find yourself shocked at how relevant some of these ideas are to today. And in any country around the world, I believe you'd be able to pick certain elements of the reality control that the government in the book is using and even apply it to today's world. Some of the things I mentioned previously as well. I think that Orwell wrote this book kind of as a way to, as like a forewarning. Because I looked into the time period, and obviously 1949, World War II had finished roughly 4 years ago. And during World War II, we saw the rise of Nazism, which was a fascist regime run by Hitler. We also saw a very, very strict communist regime by Stalin, if I'm not mistaken, from Russia. And then directly after World War II, we saw the capitalist beast, which was America, come to the fore and become a huge superpower against the communist superpower, which was Russia, and two different ways of doing things. However, what I thought was very interesting was before World War II took out, the practice war, the proxy war they call it, in Spain took place, and I believe it was from 1936 to 39, and George was involved in this. And initially he was fighting on the side of revolution, but he realized that a lot of the goal of the revolutionists was, once they had taken down the regime that was in Spain, their goal was to put one up that was actually even more authoritative than the one that was in place. And he kind of was disenchanted by this. And I believe that what this book is all about is essentially a warning to the world of different types of how these governments, could take over and what life could look like on the very worst scale of this. And this thing is something he was afraid of. And that was the reason why this book was actually banned in multiple countries due to that reason. The last thing I want to leave you with is a quote. And now this quote is, I think, very, very powerful. And it's at a point where Winston in the book is in a moment of fear. He is not in control anymore. And he is trying to argue with somebody from the party as to why he believes he's correct. And I quote, "The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and your ears. It was their final and most essential command." His heart sank as he thought of the enormous power arrayed against him, the ease at which any party intellectual would overthrow him in debate, the subtle arguments which he would not be able to understand and much less answer. And yet he was right, they were wrong, and he was right. Outside of that, thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts, please post them below, and I'll be posting one of these every single week. Thank you.